These are the planes that won the Battle of Midway, that bombed the heart out of Hitler's Germany. The planes that fought the air war over the jungles of Indochina and the deserts of Iraq. These are the planes that define the meaning of air power. These are the legends of air combat. Designed shortly after the end of World War II and entering service in February 1955, the Boeing B-52 Stratofortress is a long-range heavy bomber that is still in active service more than half a century later. It is scheduled to remain operational for many years to come. It was the workhorse of the Strategic Air Command and remains a key component of America's military arsenal. The bomber that paved the way to the B-52 was another Boeing product, the B-29 Superfortress. This was the primary U.S. strategic bomber in the air campaign against the Japanese home islands during the Second World War. In August 1945, B-29s delivered the atomic bombs that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki and ended World War II. After the war, the B-29 was followed by the generally similar B-50, with a revised structure and more powerful engines. The B-50 had a combat radius of 2,400 miles. In the B-52D, the first major production model of the Stratofortress, this combat radius was increased to an impressive 3,685 miles. On April 15, 1952, the first Stratofortress, the YB-52, took off on its maiden flight. It was, in essence, a scaled-up development of the smaller and lighter B-47 Stratojet strategic medium bomber. Its main features were the 8 J-57 turbojet engines in pairs under the wing, the main landing gear units under the fuselage, 2 small outrigger units under the outer wings for ground stability, and the large fuel tanks under the outer wing. The fighter-type cockpit enclosure of the first 2 aircraft, with the pilot and co-pilot seated in tandem, was replaced in the production models by a more standard flight deck, with the 2 pilots seated side by side. All 4 main landing gear units are located on the underside of the fuselage and retract into bays covered by doors. Each unit can be pivoted by 20 degrees from the center line to facilitate cross-wing landings. Under the starboard side of the nose is the AAQ-6 infrared sensor of the ASQ-151 Electro-Optical Viewing System, the EVS. This is matched on the port side by another steerable sensor, again associated with the EVS. This is the AVQ-22 low-light level TV. On the side of the fuselage below the flight deck is one of the antennas for the ALQ-117 deception jammer, which is part of the bomber's electronic warfare system. The most obvious feature of the Stratofortress is the great size of the 180-foot wingspan. The wing flexes up and down during takeoff and landing. It carries much of the fuel for the 8 engines, carried by pylons below and ahead of the leading edges. All B-52 variants were built with Pratt & Whitney engines. Up to the B-52G, these were J-57 turbojets. In the final variant, these were replaced by more powerful, but also more fuel-efficient, TF-33 turbofan units. The flight deck has good fields of vision for the 2 pilots. The 2 pilots occupy upward ejecting seats, with the command pilot to port and the co-pilot to starboard. Behind them, also on upward ejecting seats, are the electronic warfare officer and rear gunner positions. The navigator and radar navigator with downward ejecting seats are located one deck lower. Access to the pressurized crew compartment is provided by a hatch and ladder in the underside of the fuselage. The four main landing gear units fold upward into lower fuselage bays, which are fore and aft of the long weapons bay. This is located around the airplane's center of gravity. The tail unit is large and completely conventional, with fixed surfaces carrying hinge control surfaces.
When it was first built, this was the B-47 and the B-52 were some of the fastest airplanes around. Anybody that was going to chase us was going to have to end up coming behind us. And so we had a gunner that had a radar-controlled set of guns in the tail. Those are no longer on the airplane in modern times now, but during my time we had a 6-man crew, 2 pilots, a radar navigator, a navigator, electronic warfare officer who defended the airplane electronically, and the gunner.
In the heyday of the Stratofortress's deployment in the 1970s and 80s, the two most important B-52 variants were the B-52G and the definitive B-52H. The B-52G was a further development of the F model, with a new so-called wet wing with integral fuel tanks. This considerably increased the fuel capacity, as did the provision for 2 700-gallon external tanks under the wings. In the new model, the tail gunner was provided with an ejection seat and moved to the flight deck, within the battle station concept of grouping the crew together on 2 decks. The offensive crew members were the pilot and co-pilot on the upper deck, and the 2 bombing navigation system operators on the lower deck, all facing forward. The defensive crew members were the tail gunner and the electronic warfare officer on the upper deck facing rearward. The B-52G entered service in February 1959. A total of 193 B-52Gs were deployed. It was the primary strategic variant of the type. The 102 B-52Hs built had the same airframe and crew as the G model. First flown in July 1960, the B-52H entered service in May 1961, and the 84 aircraft of this model are the only variants still operational. B-52 production totaled 744 airplanes, and the last of these was a B-52H, completed on October 26, 1962.
The B-52 is a hard airplane to fly in some respects. We used to say it flies like a truck. It's as opposed to a smaller, faster, sleeker fighter airplane or something where you can kind of fly it with one hand. And the B-52 it takes more muscle, takes more coordination as to or it'll really wear you down. It takes a while to learn how to fly it without working real hard. In-flight refueling was probably the most difficult thing to learn about flying the airplane, most challenging, and also the most rewarding when you got so you could do it well. You can close within 1 mile on radar. From a mile on in, you have to be able to see them visually because you're flying 2 large airplanes within just a few feet of each other. And you have only a few feet of variance to be able to move. You can stay connected, in round numbers say, plus or minus 10 feet, left, right, up or down. It's a matter of the bomber pilot putting the airplane in the right position so that the boomer operator could put the boom into the receptacle. The ease of refueling depended a lot about how stable the tanker pilot flew the airplane. I enjoyed being able to do it, ended up being able to do it quite well, but it took a lot of practice.
The AGM-69 short-range attack missile was designed as the successor to the Hound Dog. SRAM was carried by the later Stratofortress models, with 6 missiles in the bomb bay and 12 carried externally. Their job was to open the way for other U.S. Air Force bombers by destroying Soviet air defense complexes. Rocket-powered out to a range of between 35 and 105 miles, the inertially guided SRAM carried a selectable 170 or 210 kiloton warhead. Once dropped, the weapon accelerated to a speed of Mach 3.5 after its motor had ignited and then headed to its target. Provision was also made in the B-52H for the carriage of 4 Skybolt ballistic missiles, but this type was not developed to the production stage. Together with the B-52G, therefore, the B-52H became the primary carrier and launcher for the AGM-86 air-launched cruise missile. This became the Stratofortress's most important offensive weapon. The ALCM, as it was always called, was loaded onto the bomber in a folded form, 8 being carried on a rotary launcher in the weapons bay. Another 12 were carried on 2 pylons under the wings. Once released, the missile unfolds its flying surfaces and starts its small turbofan engine. It then cruises, carrying a 200 kiloton nuclear warhead at high subsonic speed towards its designated target more than 1,500 miles distant via 1 or more waypoints. In later models, which carry a conventional warhead to a nominal range of 680 miles, guidance is by an inertial system, updated by an embedded global positioning system. Guidance in the original versions was based on an advanced inertial system that was updated by a radar-based contour matching system to confirm that the intended waypoints were being overflown. In 2007, the U.S. Air Force announced that, in response to treaty limitations, it was planning to cut the number of ALCMs to 528. Through much of its operational life, the Stratofortress came under the control of the Strategic Air Command, or SAC. This was established in 1946 and was deactivated after the dissolution of the USSR on May 31, 1992. SAC was headquartered at Offutt Air Force Base outside Omaha, Nebraska, and operations were controlled from a center buried 46 feet deep under the ground. Supplies and facilities were sufficient for an extended stay. In wartime, over 1,000 people would be based in this center. They had all been chosen both on the basis of their skills and experience and their emotional stability. One wall of the command center carried huge strategic displays of all the potential threats as well as the current deployment of SAC's military assets. A gold-colored telephone gave the senior controller, usually a colonel, a direct line to the president and to other major command headquarters. The SAC command post deep underground was also tied into the Ballistic Missile Early Warning System, BMEWS. This system monitors approaches to the United Kingdom and to North America. Data from the BMEWS long-range radars at Clear, Thule, and Flyingdales were fed into the North American Air Defense Command Underground Center under Cheyenne Mountain, Colorado, and also to SAC headquarters. More data was supplied by the radars of the Distant Early Warning, or DEW line. The introduction of an advanced computer system, replacing the original system based on filing cards, greatly speeded the flow of data through Strategic Air Command. Early warning of an impending Soviet strike would allow the command to ready its missiles and scramble its aircraft. The United States relied on the so-called triad of weapons systems for strategic deterrence and, if needed, nuclear war fighting. The only part of the nuclear triad not commanded by the SAC, the U.S. Navy's Submarine-Launched Ballistic Missile Force, was, and indeed continues to be, based on nuclear-powered submarines roaming the world's oceans. Patrolling submerged for sometimes as long as 70 days, these submarines are large but fast, quiet, deep diving, and perhaps most importantly of all, very difficult to detect. The submarines of the first classes, which entered service in 1960, each carried 16 Polaris and later Poseidon missiles. The current Ohio-class submarines each carry 24 of the longer-ranged and more accurate Trident missiles. The second part of the triad, directly under SAC's command, were the intercontinental ballistic missiles, the ICBMs, of the Atlas, Titan, Minuteman, and Peacekeeper types. Still operational since 1963, the U.S. Air Force's Minuteman force was spread over 6 north-central states. 200 were located in Montana. Another 200 were based in Wyoming. A further 150 were in silos in North Dakota. Another 150 were based in South Dakota. 150 Minutemen were in silos in Nebraska. Finally, there were 150 based in Missouri. In their definitive form, the ICBMs of SAC were stored in massive hardened silos, which also accommodated their launch crews. The silos were designed to survive nuclear attack and allow the U.S. to respond with a retaliatory strike. Once the silo hatch had been opened, the missile could be launched into its ballistic trajectory. In the early 1970s, the third part of America's nuclear triad were SAC's B-52 manned bombers, located at 16 bases scattered across much of the continental United States. It was believed that this dispersal of assets would make it more difficult for the Soviets to undertake attacks to take out more than a handful of these, and so leave SAC with a viable deterrent and strike capability.
One of the big advantages of the B-52 in the triad was we could be launched and on our way while they were still hopefully negotiating with the potential enemy. And whereas a missile, once it's fired, you can't turn it around. And we could go towards our targets and still turn around and come back.
In the command center, deep under the ground outside Omaha, the operations staff of the Strategic Air Command in the 1970s kept a continuous watch over the aircraft and missile assets of the command. The complex system was connected directly with the National Military Command Center in Washington, D.C., and was linked with other elements of America's strategic forces. The SAC Command Center had two-way communications with all of the command's bomber and missile bases, and could receive instantaneous information about readiness and could issue immediate orders. Middle-ranking officers implemented orders from higher up the command chain and made a number of less important command decisions. The task of connecting the command center with all SAC assets in the United States and abroad was the responsibility of senior sergeants, whom had been specifically selected for their experience. SAC also had two-way communication via a high-frequency radio link directly with any of its air assets while they were in flight. A key element in the running of a command as large as SAC was a steady flow of information regarding aircraft readiness and the disposition of all other military assets and threats. In the SAC bunker, after the senior controller's gold telephone, the next most important was the red phone. On this phone, the command issued orders to its missile control centers and also to all aircraft command posts. The only response to a red phone directive was an electronic acknowledgement.
Major Burcham, will you give us a maintenance test of the primary leading system? Skybird, this is Dropkick with a maintenance test of all stations. There will be no authentication with this maintenance test. Acknowledged now. Dropkick out.
SAC has an airborne command post called Looking Glass. Looking Glass missions are flown from Offutt Air Force Base by EC-135C jet Stratotankers. Ever since 1961, there has always been one of these aircraft in the air, an airborne command post complete with communications equipment. Manned by an experienced team of controllers commanded by a general officer, Looking Glass, in effect, mirrors its underground counterpart and can assume full direction of the SAC bomber and missile force. This airborne command post assures that SAC's command control system will survive any initial attack and be able to execute the command's emergency war orders in the direction of the President.
The combination of in-flight and underground command capabilities was created to ensure that SAC continued to function effectively even during a nuclear attack. It allowed orders to be modified in the light of changing operational conditions and to ensure the recall of the bombers if required. Complex but honed to a keen edge of efficiency, the SAC Command Center was designed to ensure that everyday peacetime command communications were maintained, and more importantly, that any wartime presidential orders were routed accurately and speedily to the relevant SAC bombers and missiles. Coded target information was fed to the aircraft command posts and from there to the attack force.
Aside from flying training missions and keeping up on our other training requirements, which a lot of it was academic type of thing, our other main thing we did was be on a ground alert. And typically we were on 24 hours a day for 7 days. Part of the alert concept was to practice being alert, which meant you had practice scrambles anytime, day or night, to be able to get the ground alert force off the ground within 15 minutes. That was the kind of the norm of what they figured the warning time would be for incoming missiles. And we didn't know when the horn went off whether it was practice or whether it was real. Not till you got to the airplane and decoded the message that came from the command post to keep all our fleet from being destroyed on the ground, but the commander of Strategic Air Command had the authority to launch the alert force. The positive control aspect of all this was that only the President of the United States is authorized to initiate a strike on enemy territory. There was coded messages involved and had to be authenticated and decoded by more than one person on the airplane.
Had it come to nuclear war between the U.S. and USSR in the 1970s, B-52H bombers would have been launched from the northern U.S. across the polar route toward the USSR. As part of the continuously upgraded triad, it was planned during the 1970s that the Minuteman III ICBM, carrying three 350-kiloton independently targeted warheads to a range of 6,000 miles, should be replaced by the more modern and accurate Peacekeeper. The Peacekeeper was able to deliver up to 10 independently targeted 300-kiloton warheads to a range of 6,000 miles. Only 50 such missiles were ever deployed, and these were retired in 2005. Although the B-52 had originally been designed for the delivery of strategic nuclear weapons on Soviet targets, it in fact saw its first combat in the Vietnam War. Direct American military involvement dated from 1963, when pro-Western South Vietnam was attempting to prevent the country's collapse to an insurgency war promoted by Communist North Vietnam. The first U.S. aid was in the provision of training and equipment, with advisors limited to use of their own weapons only for self-defense. Among the first U.S. airplanes to see operations over South Vietnam was the Douglas B-52 Invader, a twin-engine attack bomber designed in World War II. Strong, fast, and agile, and fitted with a powerful battery of fixed forward-firing 50-caliber machine guns, the Invader was well suited to this low-intensity stage of the Vietnam War. Armed with air-to-surface rockets, free-for-all unitary bombs, and napalm tanks, the Invader was therefore still a useful weapon by the standards of the early 1960s. Steadily increasing U.S. involvement in the war led to use of older B-52 models as so-called bomb trucks, carrying 17,000 pounds of high-explosive bombs to blast communist troop concentrations and tunnel complexes.
We flew all our bombing missions as a three-ship formation, 3 people in a cell. You'd have a cell leader, and 2 cells would be together called a wave. And the more experienced people would be the cell leader or the wave leaders. Keep in mind again, the B-52 was built initially as a nuclear bomber, so it didn't have a large bomb bay. So when we carried iron bombs, the 500-pounders, we had them in the bomb bay and also on racks under the wings. The missions out of Guam were the longest and the hardest because of their length. Typically 12, 13, 14-hour round trip. Always did an air refueling on the way over because you needed the 60,000 pounds of fuel, which takes about 15 to 16 minutes of constant contact. I think the bombing was fairly active. We were normally given a pretty large target area, a target box, because of the type of bombing we were doing and the number of bombs we were dropping. We typically carried 106 500-pounders. Well, if you have a formation of 3 airplanes, that's over 300 bombs you're dropping in one target area. So you need a pretty good size area that's considered a possible viable target to do that.
Operating from bases in Thailand, such as Utapao, the B-52D bomber could carry heavier bomb loads, up to a maximum of 70,000 pounds in the enlarged weapon bay, and on 2 new underwing beam racks.
The crew concept, I think, was a very important thing that Strategic Air Command learned early on, that it is very much a team effort. They felt that crew coordination was a vital part of having an effective weapon system, and we had a set crew. We didn't just fly with random people. We didn't pick a pilot from here and a co-pilot from there and a navigator from someplace else. We had a set crew, and we normally flew with the same people for months or even years to make a very coordinated team. You have a better idea of just what everybody's job is, how you would react. As aircraft commander, I had a pretty good understanding of what everyone did, but I did not have the knowledge to actually do their job. I couldn't have gone down and been the radar navigator. I knew what he was supposed to do in general concepts and how he did it in generalities, but I couldn't have physically taken his place, just like he could not have physically flown the airplane, even though he understood what I did.
As the pilot completed his walk around of the aircraft, armorers gave a final check and fused the external bomb load. The final external checks included the removal of warning tags, checking that all opening panels were locked shut, and confirming that there were no fuel and/or hydraulic system leaks. The aircraft was now ready for its mission.
Okay, radios. You're on, pilot.
On, co-pilot.
Warning and indicator lights.
101, taxi runway 36, 1330 degrees at 6, altitude 2900 enter 0.
Air press to test, pilot.
Warning and indicator lights, press test co-pilot.
Firewall switches. Engine check, pilot.
Unit check co-pilot.
Gyro switch is on. Navigation lights are bright and flash. Ground connected clear the bomb doors.
Bomb doors connected clear, sir.
Validating your frequency.
Frequency improved. And fuel quantities next.
And check co-pilot, the altimeter is 2990. Elevation here is 50 feet.
Okay, pilot 2990, I have a correction of +1.
2990, 0 correction co-pilot.
In the tail position of the earlier variants, the lone rear gunner had a small, pressurized compartment of his own and controlled 4 .50 caliber machine guns. With internal and external checks completed, the flight deck crew started the 8 turbojet engines, all the while looking out for signs of fire and watching the engine's temperature and pressure instruments. With all engines running properly and the ground crew clear, the control tower ordered the bomber to start taxiing from the fueling and arming revetment towards the runway.
Okay, and that when the taxi across Hotel 3 busted the refueling pit lid.
45 seconds. Seconds. Okay, we should have 1.5 left set. 20 seconds. Now it's when grab is checked and down. 15 seconds. 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Ram. You're playing a Charleston. Take off the light. Coming up 70 knots. Now, back. Seconds. Ready, now. Ready. Belly up on him, stick now. Legs. On. Getting my gear. Raise it.
For the D model, which I flew out of Guam and Okinawa in Thailand, max gross weight was 450,000 pounds. In the later model B-52s, which is the G and H models, the gross weights for takeoff was 488,000, of which the majority of it's fuel. You figure an airplane that weighs that much can have up to 300,000 pounds of fuel in it. Traditionally, Strategic Air Command bases had pretty good sized runway in the 10 to 12,000 foot range for day-to-day operations. At all its weight ranges, you needed a pretty good sized runway. The missions, particularly out of Guam, were long and boring because you basically drove for 6 hours and dropped your bomb load and drove another 6 hours back home. The primary difference in flying out of Thailand was the fact we were so close to our target area that it was a much shorter mission. And the challenge actually was to take off, climb to altitude, do your appropriate checklist to get the weapons ready, all before you get to the target area, make your bomb run, and then come back. And so it was, missions could be as short as an hour and a half.
Street is coming out pretty good. 090 at this time.
Turning 090.
Lee has Mr. Skill there. Roger, there.
And EW, this is Point Whiskey, SCM.
Roger, copy. I see him at this time. Pilot nav.
Roger, now.
Got me up the bomb run heading to 281.
281, you want that heading now?
Roger.
Okay, turning 281.
Roger, pilot.
We, the United States Air Force, had ground-based radar sites in Vietnam and in Thailand, and they would guide us in the final bomb run as to whether or not we were on the right target line, and then we knew what the target line was supposed to be, and our radar navigator on our airplane would verify. The lead, the cell lead, would be in charge of getting us on the right place, and the other two members of the cell would fly along with them. So it was we had two different sources of being sure we were on the right targets.
Crew tension inevitably grew as the bomber closed on its target area.
Police power switch. Sorry. Bomb door control valve lights are off.
Roger, checked out.
Bombing system switch manual. Bomb doors open to 30 TG, coming up on 30 TG.
30 TGs.
Roger.
Engine coming up.
Roger.
Doors checked open.
Roger, that completes the checklist. Ready, now.
Doors open.
Roger, standing by release.
PDI cert.
Roger.
Put coming up on southbound, 060 now. 060. On southbound and counting 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
I got the time going. 8.5 is what we want. Stand by to release. Ready, now.
Bombs running.
Peacock, this is Black.
Stand by EAR. Ready, now.
Yeah.
Stand by for brake pilot.
Standing by.
Brake right. Ready, now.
Okay, I'm going to roll into a right turn now. And I'll be holding it for maybe 10 seconds. Cleared right front, good.
No, sir, you clear right tail.
Braking right.
090 heading pilot.
Roger.
Stand by for impact. Impact time, ready, now.
The 74 B-52Fs, adapted for the bomb truck role, with payload beams under their wings, played a major part in the U.S. air effort over Vietnam. They were supplemented by B-52Ds, modified with the big belly weapons bay conversion to carry 84 rather than 27 500-pound bombs, or 42 rather than 27 750-pound bombs. The bombers' missions were swiftly expanded from South to North Vietnam in an effort to pressure the communist government to end its support for the insurgency in the South. The Stratofortresses inflicted immense damage and quickly became one of the U.S. weapons that was most feared by the North Vietnamese. B-52 raids leveled large areas of forest cover, collapsed tunnel complexes, savaged communist regiments, and crippled much of North Vietnam's limited transport and manufacturing capabilities. No other American bomber could deliver the massive payloads needed to achieve this. In the spring of 1972, it was the Linebacker 1 bombing offensive that was largely responsible for bringing the North Vietnamese government to the negotiating table. Meeting in a chateau just outside Paris, these were the first realistic talks about ending the U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War. Short return flights to U Ta Pao, sometimes in damaged airplanes, did much to increase the morale of Stratofortress crews, while at the same time reducing fatigue. This increased the efficiency of the B-52 bombing effort, reduced wear and tear on the airframe, and reduced fuel consumption to a considerable degree. Lasting from the 21st of January to the 8th of April 1968, the Battle of Khe Sanh in the northwest corner of South Vietnam was one of the major battles in the Vietnam War. At Khe Sanh, some 20,000 to 30,000 North Vietnamese troops laid siege to the U.S. firebase held by some 6,000 U.S. Marines. The North Vietnamese intended to surround and eventually overrun the American base. A similar victory at Dien Bien Phu in 1954 had forced the then colonial power, the French, to leave Southeast Asia for good. Khe Sanh was kept resupplied by airplanes and helicopters. They also flew out the wounded on their return. The garrison held out against great odds, thanks to its own firepower and the support of U.S. air power along the perimeter of the fighting. A total of 605 Americans were killed and 1,600 wounded. Estimates for North Vietnamese casualties vary between 10 and 15,000. To help in the defense of Khe Sanh, B-52s were tasked with pounding North Vietnamese troop concentration areas, artillery positions, and lines of supply immediately outside the battle perimeter. A total of 2,548 sorties were flown by the B-52s, and a staggering 59,000 tons of bombs were dropped on the North Vietnamese before the siege was eventually lifted. Between the 9th of May and the 23rd of October 1972, during Operation Linebacker 1, B-52s flying from Guam were tasked with attacking strategic transport targets in North Vietnam. Linebacker 2, the so-called Christmas bombings, followed between the 18th and 29th of December of the same year. The Linebacker 2 missions were the most concentrated U.S. bombing attacks since World War II, largely due to the greater emphasis placed on the use of the Stratofortress heavy bombers. Linebacker 2 saw the dispatch of 741 B-52 sorties to bomb North Vietnamese targets. 729 missions were completed, dropping 15,237 tons of ordnance on 18 industrial and 14 military targets, including 8 SAM sites.
Right at the end, when they started going north to Hanoi and Haiphong, and we ran into lots and lots of surface-to-air missiles and fighters. I think there's 2 cases of B-52 shooting down a fighter, a MiG fighter. And when you go into that type of a defended position, your electronic warfare officer, who is kind of considered an extra crew member on normal training, becomes your good friend because he's going to protect you.
The Linebacker 2 operation cost the U.S. forces 27 aircraft, including 15 B-52s, most of them to Soviet-supplied SA-2 Guideline surface-to-air missiles. 10 of the big bombers went down in North Vietnam, and the other 5 fell victim to combat damage in Thailand and Laos as they tried to return to base. 33 B-52 crewmen were posted dead or missing, and another 33 were taken prisoner, while 26 were rescued. The team sent to rescue downed airmen was based on one Sikorsky HH-3 helicopter, generally known as the Jolly Green Giant, which was supported by a varying number of Douglas A-1 Skyraider piston engine attack planes. This latter was known as the Sandy and was selected as its speed was similar to that of the helicopter. It carried a heavy ordnance load of guns, bombs, and rockets, and had great endurance. Once the downed men had been located, The Sandy airplanes patrolled the area to locate and destroy or pin down any communist troops trying to capture the American airmen. The helicopter then came in to lower its rescue wire, fitted with a jungle penetrator. This enabled the downed man to wriggle into the harness and then be pulled up safely. The entire rescue team then returned to base. Despite the best efforts of the air attacks, and especially the Iron Hand and Wild Weasel, specialized defense suppression airplanes, the North Vietnamese seemed always to have a supply of the Guideline SAMs and their associated radar and fire control systems. At the sound of the air raid siren, North Vietnamese civilians seemed to melt into the ground. All cities and towns possessed a network of underground air raid shelters, large and small. Low-flying reconnaissance airplanes were tasked with assessing the damage caused by the high-flying B-52s. Wounded or not, captured U.S. airmen were often filmed as they were paraded with indignity throughout areas they had attacked. While the war in Vietnam continued to occupy most of the Pentagon's attention, military planners also had to consider the strategic issues of a major war with the Soviet Union. Thankfully, this never occurred. In August 1990, President Saddam Hussein of Iraq precipitated the first Gulf War by ordering his forces to invade and take Kuwait. Although ordered by the United Nations to withdraw his forces, Saddam refused. A coalition of nations was created under U.S. leadership within a UN mandate to expel the Iraqis by force if this became necessary. As part of this effort, provision was made for B-52s to operate from Fairford in the United Kingdom and from Morón in Spain. Attacks were mounted on targets in northern and southern Iraq, as well as on Iraqi troop concentrations in occupied Kuwait. Even though the youngest of the airplanes was now almost 30 years old, the Stratofortress was again readied for involvement in another war, but again with conventional weapons. The airplanes were brought up to full operational readiness and spare parts were stockpiled. The crews trained for the very long deployment flights and, in some cases, very lengthy operational missions over Iraq. Some of the B-52 force was deployed from the base on the island of Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean. Others flew from an airfield outside Jeddah in Saudi Arabia. Training re-emphasized the need for crews to maintain their focus during the long approach and exit flights, and of course, to remain fully focused during the bombing phase of each mission. Little or no Iraqi air attack was expected, but it was expected that Iraqi surface-to-air missiles and anti-aircraft artillery could prove troublesome. All Stratofortresses returned safely to base, and none of the mighty aircraft were lost during operations over Iraq. Although it was originally developed as a strategic bomber for the free-fall delivery of nuclear bombs and later for the carriage and launch of nuclear-tipped supersonic and subsonic attack missiles, the B-52 has developed into a superb tactical weapon, capable of delivering a massive payload of conventional weapons. The B-52 Stratofortress has proven so effective and long lived in service that had the type never been developed, the U.S. would have found itself with a huge operational gap in its military capabilities. Other bombers were developed, offering higher performance but shorter range and a smaller warload. But the Stratofortress excelled in range and sheer durability. The Vietnam War would have been radically different without the B-52's conventional armament capability, and the Cold War could well have developed in an altogether different way. Variously known to its crews as the Buff, the Beast, and Aluminum Overcast, the B-52 has served the United States Air Force faithfully for more than half a century. The Stratofortress remains a superb bomber, and with many years of service still ahead of it, is truly a legend of air combat.